Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to another look at the latest experimental snapshots for the Caves and Cliffs update part 2. Today we are looking at Experimental Snapshot 3, which has made a bunch of tweaks to changes that were made in Experimental Snapshots 1 and 2, with the aim of smoothing out some of the changes that people didn't quite like about the terrain. And as per usual, I'm going to be exploring this world in survival mode a little bit before we go ahead and do some side-by-side comparisons of Experimental Snapshots 2 and 3. At this point, I think it's probably best to ignore Experimental Snapshot 1 for the purposes of these side-by-sides, and it also makes a little bit less work for me. But I like to get my first impressions of these snapshots inside of a survival with a fresh world, brand new random seed on hard difficulty. Let's walk around a little bit and see if we can figure out what has changed. First of all, I don't know what elevation we have spawned at here. Okay, we're at Y77, so not super high up in the world. That seems fine to me. We did spawn right next to a kind of connecting biome between a jungle, a mesa, a savanna, and right here we've got a little patch of ordinary forest. And this is one of the things that is chief among the changes they have made in the most recent changelog, and that is to make sure that there are fewer temperature clashes between biomes. Wow, okay, there's an aquifer right here, I see, right. I'm going to grab some stone from down here. But yeah, the temperature clashes were occurring in the previous snapshots where quite frequently you would see things like a jungle spawning on a mountainside with a bunch of snow nearby, or you'd find that there was, a mesa biome right next to an ice spikes. The kind of things that wouldn't really make a great deal of sense in the real world. And of course, Minecraft isn't necessarily sticking to real world rules all the time, but it does make a little bit more sense for these temperature clash biomes to be minimal. And they're not gone for good. You will still find odd areas where the world has generated some kind of interesting terrain, but in this case, they're at least trying to minimize the risk of that happening. And as we can see here, we've spawned in a fairly warm area of the world, being right next to a savanna and everything. You can at least expect the world to be a little bit more predictable, which is good, because if we wanted to find a desert to get rabbits for bundles or something like that, then it would be a good chance of finding a desert adjacent to some of these areas instead of exploring a savanna and finding something completely out of place like an ice plains or something like that. Taking a look at the changelog, I don't see anything about the scarcity of iron. I actually was able to speak to Henrik Nierberg on one of my recent episodes of the Spawn Chunks podcast, the podcast I do with my friend Joel about all of the stuff that's going on in Minecraft week to week, and he actually mentioned maybe increasing the likelihood of surface iron. I've been lucky enough to find one piece here that I can use to make my first shield, and that will mean a little bit more likelihood of survival as we head down into the caves. It looks like there might be a bit more iron down there, which I am quite tempted to go and get, but I don't fancy tangling with skeletons until I at least have a stone axe and a shield on my hotbar. But personally, I am hoping for a little bit more access to surface level iron, because having a shield or at least a little bit of armor before you go caving usually helps you feel a little bit safer and means that you don't need to worry as much about instantly dying and losing whatever you've gathered from the surface in the process of exploring. At least with a shield, I should be able to take care of some of these creepers, and yes, I think I do see a little bit more iron generating in the wall of this cave over here. As we explore a little bit here, we should also be able to take advantage of the changes to mob spawning, where mobs should not be spawning within the radius of torchlights. So hopefully we can take advantage of that, explode the occasional creepers when they happen. We got a dripstone cave down there, and continue to block with the shield to take care of the rest of the creepers. Okay, perfect. That should at least allow us access over here. Excuse me, Mr. Enderman. Perfect, we got a bunch of iron. And as with the previous worlds that I've generated for these experimental snapshot videos, I will be putting the seeds on the screen and in the video description. So think of this as world 1 for the video. You'll find the seed in the description of the video if you want to check it out for yourself in Experimental Snapshots 1, 2, or 3. So that is a good bunch of iron that we managed to get from that cave. Should be enough for an iron pickaxe and a couple of pieces of armor at least. This cave looks kind of fascinating, but I'll be honest, most of the interesting changes in this snapshot are probably going to be on the surface. So I think I'll make my way out of this cave for now, go looking for some animals that I can use to get some food and make a bed, and we'll try exploring the overworld to see what we can find. And this immediately makes me very happy, because in the previous couple of snapshots, wow, okay, there's some weird stuff going on with the mountains over there. The Badlands generation, or Mesa generation, as some of you might be familiar with it, made it so that the Badlands were generating in plateaus as part of hillsides and stuff, but that meant red sand was not really generating all that much. Whereas here, we have a massive patch of red sand adjacent to this desert biome out here, which is probably going to be my main source of food if I can find some rabbits and get some rabbit hide for a bundle perhaps. But it looks like the terrain is generating much the same as it does in current Minecraft terrain gen, with a layer of red sand on top of a layer of orange terracotta. So we can't expect multiple layers of red sand. Red sandstone is not about to become an abundance in the game, but hopefully we'll be able to get a little bit of it from biomes like this one. And yeah, the terrain generation has been tweaked a little bit, but there are still these shattered areas of terrain, independent from shattered savanna plateaus and other similar biomes. Now you should find some of these generating around your worlds more frequently, although it has been said in the changelog that the cliffs have been smoothed out a little bit, so we won't see as many of those weird issues that looked like chunk errors than we saw in our first world in the last experimental snapshot. Now, I've just spotted a group of sheep over here on the horizon. I'm going to double back to the savanna biome and get hold of those because night is falling and I have yet to acquire either food or a bed. So this could go badly for me very quickly. And we're actually going to take a look further down the changelog for this next change because it's about to apply to our situation here. Mob spawning has now been tweaked so it does not depend on height anymore. We're used to talking about mob farming relative to the height of the world, and it has long been the case that the further down you build in the world, the higher the spawn rates of things like hostile and passive mobs. That seems to no longer be the case as of this update, or at least this experimental snapshot. They are still, of course, open to feedback about some of these changes happening, but it was, of course, a concern that the technical community had. What was going to happen to mob spawning when the world was 64 blocks higher and 64 blocks deeper, especially with the introduction of hard-to-mine materials like deep slate, digging a perimeter all the way to the bottom of the world to account for the highest rates of mob spawning was potentially going to be a problem. That has now been changed so that mob spawning is no longer affected by height, making mob farms up in the sky just as viable as mob farms built near the bedrock. Now, my first kind of knee-jerk reaction to this was a less positive one. I kind of thought maybe this takes out some of the nuance from technical Minecraft that people kind of enjoy knowing about, the finer details of stuff like this. But then again, in my opinion, it's probably a change for the better because it allows for the mechanics of spawning in Minecraft to be a little bit more intuitive to newer players. We don't have to worry about explaining the fact that mob farms will work better the lower down you get, and you no longer have to worry too much about digging out a perimeter and exactly what that entails. All of the time and effort that that might involve can now go into resource gathering and building the farm wherever. While we might not be able to take advantage of better spawn rates at the bottom of the world anymore, it will certainly make things a little bit easier when it comes to deciding where to place a farm and remove some of the obstacles to building those farms in the first place. And so that is a change that I'm quite interested in seeing a little bit of feedback from folks in the comments about. What do you think about that change in particular? If you're a technical player, what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Do you think there is a better solution to this that Mojang could implement? It's important for them to get feedback at this stage of experimentation, so I think it'd be really valuable to get a discussion started about that. Well, I've wandered my way into a desert village over here on the other edge of the desert, still looking for rabbits so that I can complete my first bundle, but right here we're noticing another significant change in this experimental snapshot. Desert temples have been adjusted so that they spawn on the surface, so that they will actually generate on the surface of a desert like this instead of being buried. Some of the height variation in the landscape was burying them a little bit too deep. And according to the thread on Reddit where people have been discussing these changes already, there may already be plans to roll back this change a little bit and make it so that temples can have some randomness in their spawn location. But at the very least, right now it is a lot easier to spot a buried desert temple because they aren't buried anymore, they're just on the surface. And we got 3 emeralds in here and a golden apple. I am looking for 3 diamonds. I only got 2 of them. There we go. There's my 3 diamond chest. Unbelievable. Oh, so happy I got that. And we got some string as well so that we can make ourselves a bundle if we need one. I think it's time to get out of here. Honestly, the amount I get 3 diamonds in some of those loot chests at this point is really quite funny to me. We got some Curse of Vanishing leggings. We got an Unbreaking hoe. We're going to take it all at this point. I think we might as well. And you wouldn't know it from looking at this place, but this collection of turtles kind of tipped me off about the fact that this right here is a beach biome blending with the desert, as you can see. And it turns out beaches have been given a bit of a boost since their last outing in Experimental Snapshot 2 kind of reduced the amount of beaches we saw spawning out there. There are still some areas where the regular land will slope down into the ocean and beaches will be absent, but in some low-lying areas like this, beaches have been brought back into play again, and you'll find fewer stone shores, except in places where there is a little bit higher elevation. I think it's pretty safe to say that we're seeing a decent amount of beaches around the outside here. There's one opposite us over there across the bay, and there is a decent amount here that is probably still classified as beach. Where you can see the desert well there, that is where the desert biome takes over again. Anyway, we've got a bit of iron. Let's make a bucket for some water. Let's make ourselves a diamond pick, because we've got the diamonds to do it after all. We could even go for a diamond sword as well if we wanted to. Yeah, I think we might as well at this point. And I think I'm going to spend a bit more time scouring the desert for bunnies so that we can make a bundle, and then we're going to go look at some of these mountains in the area. There we go, that's enough rabbit hide that'll get us our first bundle, and very excited to get one of those because we have a whole bunch of items that we can clear up from the inventory here. Let's throw the saplings in there as well. Perfect. We can probably chuck the TNT in. We'll leave the fire charges in there as well. I think the other stuff here we can just keep on us as we need it. We need to grab a bucket of water. Let's make our way back over there to those mountains. So this is looking nice and pastoral. We have a sunflower plains leading through these two, I guess, extreme hills on the side, although they're not really extreme hills biomes. They look a little bit more like just elevated forests to me. We've got a bit of birch on each of these. Yeah, this is a flower forest biome. Oh, very nice. Okay, perhaps not the mountain range I thought was starting in this direction, but we can explore the world a little further and see what we can find. One thing I'm noticing right now that makes me quite happy is the fact that all of the biomes seem a lot more consistent than they have been in previous snapshots. Even if they have reintroduced some of the randomness and some of the microbiomes that people were kind of enjoying, a little bit of sudden randomness in the middle of a forest, like there'd be a small clearing, or perhaps like a couple of small trees for a forest biome ending up somewhere completely different. I think we saw one back at spawn actually with a little bit of forest amongst all of the savanna and mesa generation. I think a lot of the temperature clash stuff being ironed out has really made it feel like a more coherent landscape again, and you aren't finding, like I said, snow plains next to absurd jungles and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if those two over there, okay, that looks like a roofed forest. Okay, I was wondering if we were going to see a mushroom fields given how close together those mushrooms were, but it does look like a tiny little patch of roofed forest generating over there. This is interesting actually. This is a perfect example of what I was talking about. Right here in the midst of a birch forest, we got a roofed forest on this side. We have this fairly small patch of what I presume, yeah, it's extreme hills. Just by the grass color you can kind of tell a little bit of stone breaching the surface around here, potentially a good spot to dig up some coal and stuff. But as far as extreme hills go, this is on the smaller side compared to ones we've seen in previous snapshots. So these little microbiomes do pop out here, and this is a perfect example of one of those, but it feels a lot more consistent with the landscape because this isn't appearing in the middle of a giant desert. This looks like a tall birch forest. I know a lot of people are very keen on me noting the tall birch forest. We've got plenty of bees buzzing around us, and I think it's probably a good time to leave this world behind because I don't want to set my first impressions just on what this world has to offer. Minecraft's terrain is incredibly diverse in these snapshots, so let's load up World 2 and see what we find there. And as I expected, our spawn location is completely different. We got a jungle over there in the distance, kind of similar to the jungle we spawned near before, but we have a nice open grassland here, a nice bit of flat terrain, a typical kind of mountain formation or hill formation, I guess, over here. Some slightly wackier looking stone generation on this side, almost like a giant hole has been punched out of the mountainside there. And over here, a plateau with some slightly more geometric cliffs in it. Let's make our way over in that direction and see if we can get a bead on a mountain range. I'm seeing some snow-capped hills over here, although that may just be the elevation that is reaching. Let's punch a couple of trees and see where we end up. Heading up into the hillier terrain, we do have a couple of boxy moments, especially this cliff here, which has a tree generating right alongside it, kind of growing up the face of this kind of outcropping here, which I quite like. I think that's kind of neat. It looks Minecrafty without being immersion breaking, I feel. And it seems like the snow-capped section up here is just fairly standard extreme hills snow generation. That's totally fine, and this is another aspect of the changelog I wanted to address. It's that we don't find too many of those peak biomes generating in lower terrain elevations anymore. So this is another extreme hills, only goes up to Y102, and you could expect to find a peak biome generating if the terrain sloped upwards from here, but you're not going to find a lofty peaks or a meadow or something generating at a lower elevation anymore, because those were designed to be mountain biomes. And in fact, we have an additional mountain biome variant that's been added in this experimental snapshot. I'm going to run a locate biome command to see if I can steer us in the right direction here, because there should now be a Stony Peaks biome, which it looks like is 3,000 blocks away, so we probably won't be headed in that direction right now, but we'll try and find one of those when we jump back into this world and fly around in spectator mode. For now, I've just spotted a village on the horizon, so we may as well go and see one of those. Mostly so we can snag these hay bales for some nice easy food and work on our trajectory from here. I did notice some higher elevation terrain spawning over there. The spruce trees on the top of that mountain look quite promising. I'm thinking we go and check out that plateau. Another aspect of the changelog that is worth discussing is that coastlines are now less likely to get messed up by aquifers. And here I think the coastline has generated in a fairly natural way. There is an aquifer that seems to lead further down, and there is actually a chance for these to lead even deeper down into air pockets that could start a cave system, so you might be able to exit an aquifer down into a cave. And is that potentially a huge vein of copper? Looks like it might be, with the granite forming with copper ore inside of it, yes, but I don't think I have the breath to go down there and mine out all of that copper right away, so I'm going to make for the shore over here. So potentially, yes, aquifers are changing a little bit. Oh, once again, a microbiome right here, which is quite interesting. We have a tiny savanna right next to some of the taiga biome and flower forest generation here, and that's honestly not too bad. I like being able to get 4 different types of trees all in one place right here, and the savanna really isn't hurting anybody being there, so I think that's quite nice generation. I'm not seeing a huge amount from this taiga biome. It has generated in quite an interesting way. We've got some sand up there at higher elevations. I think it is trying to start a beach biome up there. I think it's probably going to be for the best if we hop down here carefully and try and make ourselves a boat and go across the water here to see if any interesting biomes have generated on the opposite side of the ocean. What I'm really looking for right now is mountains, to see if there have been any significant changes there. So let's see what we can find. Well, that frozen ocean biome seemed to go on forever. We have a mushroom fields biome in front of us, a little mushroom island out here in the ocean, looking pretty similar to the way we've seen mushroom islands generate before. No wacky terrain changes here, although you never know, there might be aquifers and new cave entrances in one of these mushroom islands. I haven't really seen any of them since we started the experimental snapshots. Let's stop here and take a quick look. Well, we certainly have an interesting environment here, a mushroom fields biome with a lush cave underneath, and here is something that we didn't really cover because there wasn't the opportunity to cover it in previous snapshots. But in this case, this is not an aspect that is unique to this experimental snapshot. It's more to do with the biome generation and how 3D biomes work in Minecraft. Now, normally, a mushroom biome would guarantee that the biome ran all the way from the surface to the underground to bedrock, and that would mean that you didn't get any mob spawns in chunks around a mushroom island. But in this case, a lush cave has spawned underneath, and a lush cave being a biome in its own right, it has its own spawning conditions, meaning that mobs will spawn down here even though there is a mushroom island biome on the surface. That's worth noting. But look at this. This is such a cool environment, a tropical paradise underneath the mushroom island. And obviously you could take the moss up to the surface, spread over this entire thing, and convert the whole thing into a lush cave. But look at this. I really love the way this is generated. That's absolutely spectacular. And I want to spend more time here, but I am still on my quest to find a mountain if I can get one. But I'll definitely take a note of the coordinates of this. That's 1900, 460. All right, we'll be back. We'll be back for this a little bit later on. The deep ocean biome continued, and here is an example of a really adorable and frankly quite unique microbiome. There is an oak tree on top of this iceberg. Is that a different type of biome, or is this just an anomaly? Well, all of this appears to be deep frozen ocean. We are heading towards a spruce forest on the shore there. I do kind of want to take down bits of this tree to see if that... Nope, that is still a deep frozen ocean biome. Okay, well, it seems to have generated a single oak tree atop this iceberg. That's really quite cool. I like that a lot. Incredible tall spruce forest here. This one feels really, really nice. It's like we are venturing into the great outdoors and looking for somewhere to camp. There's loads of trees around. There are rock formations. The boulders are kind of hanging in the air occasionally as we make our way through here, but I think that's probably something they need to tweak and fix a little bit. We have massive cliff sides with overhangs that allow the spruce trees to look majestic against the skyline, and over there in the distance it looks like we are heading out into a cold taiga biome with even more mountain generation. And yes, having decided that we could cross so much of the ocean this way, I am headed towards that Stony Peaks that we looked up the coordinates for a little earlier. And this looks like an interesting change, a bit of an overlap here between a swamp and a colder biome. The changelog says this should be less likely to happen since swamps are meant to be temperate biomes and like more humid biomes, so you're likely to see swamps and jungles sticking together a little bit more, but the dry biomes, the cold biomes, aren't supposed to interact with swamps as much. As we can see though, that can still happen, and once again, a bit of biome variety is still to be expected, even if it's not going to be the norm. Whoa, it just gets taller and taller. Look at this. Oh, I hope we are approaching our destination here. I think we're still about 1,000 blocks off where we needed to be for that Stony Peaks biome, but we're really starting to see some impressive changes in the terrain height right about now. This looks more like a shattered savanna plateau biome. We've got a forest, and it looks like a spruce forest on this side, but yeah, we are really entering some extremes of terrain right here, along with these really awesome caves, which would be perfect for pirate builds or something like that. I think we need to make land here and step out onto the shore. Once again, noting a few azalea trees around here, so it looks like there is some lush cave generation in the surroundings. The nearest Stony Peaks biome is at 2548, negative 2552. Yep, it was right here. Why 135? Well, that's a bit of an anticlimax. I was hoping for more, to be quite honest. But honestly, I think I've had enough of this world for now. I think I've seen a bunch of really encouraging stuff, and I think it's time to do a side-by-side comparison of these two worlds, another world generated in Experimental Snapshot 3, and then maybe we'll go back to my favorite worlds from Experimental Snapshot 2 and see what is different. Okay, welcome back. Here we go with the side-by-side comparisons. Experimental Snapshot 2 from July on the left, Experimental Snapshot 3 from August on the right. This is the first world that we spawned into, the one that had the mesa, the desert, the savanna all very close together. And as you can see from Snapshot 2 on the left, completely different landscape. The Snapshot 3 terrain has mesa built into it, has all of that red sand added back into the generation, and honestly, just having a bunch of these warm biomes next to each other, once again, gives the world a feel of consistency in terms of the temperature of all of these biomes, which is really important for gameplay, because you want to be able to know that you can potentially find a savanna next to a jungle or a desert or a mesa, and the fact that those biomes were all jumbled up in the previous snapshots meant that the game wasn't really giving you those clues about where to find those biomes, and the search becomes all the more frustrating. A lot of the terrain generation is more or less the same though, looking at the elevation, the heights of everything. The thing that's changed mostly is the biome wrapper around the outside. They've kind of been painted over with a different veneer of biomes, and things like surface tree spawning and things are a little bit different, but that's par for the course whenever they tweak some terrain generation like this. The layer of trees is applied afterwards to match. And structure generation will be slightly different. You can see on the left-hand side we got a pillager outpost there that wasn't in Experimental Snapshot 3. But according to the changelog, Experimental Snapshot 3 has actually added a few other locations for villages and pillager outposts. They will now spawn in meadows and some of the other mountain biomes. So it's actually kind of interesting seeing the differences between the two. I don't have any great examples for you here. Most of the time when there was a village in Experimental Snapshot 2, there was also one in a similar location in Experimental Snapshot 3, as long as it wasn't overwritten by a biome that didn't have a valid village spawning location. Like back there where there was a birch forest instead of a spruce forest, villagers don't typically spawn there. But the topography of the terrain, like I said, is much the same. A couple of different biomes here and there, and honestly, like we saw earlier, a little bit more consistency in what exactly those biomes are. This is World 2 from this video. This is Experimental Snapshot 2 and 3 once again. The seed is on the screen for you there. And honestly, this one was mostly the same. As I flew through it, you found a lot of the same biomes in similar locations. Once again, there were a few areas where the temperature of biomes had been tidied up a little bit, so you found less snow plains attached to jungle biomes and that kind of thing. In fact, overall, I'm noticing less jungle biome generation in the world as a whole. And you'll also see some slightly different placement of beaches, but once again, beaches are more present in Experimental Snapshot 3 thanks to the fact that they've been tweaked a little bit. I think one of the most significant changes to this seed actually came in the form of the ocean biomes, because as you can see here, the ice field, the kind of frozen ocean area that I got into where we found the Mushroom Island, it's just not there in Experimental Snapshot 2, and there's a couple of other cold ocean and lukewarm ocean biomes that got a bit rearranged. And honestly, I wasn't expecting that, but the overground biomes and the ocean biomes don't really have a great deal of correlation. With that said, the frozen ocean here blended right into a snowy beach and then into the mega taiga that we found our way through as we were exploring that world. So honestly, it still fits together quite well, and I don't know if Mojang is trying to marry the ocean biome temperature with the temperature of surface biomes the rest of the world, but it could be a good move if they did. This is moving on to World 3. This is a brand new world I generated first in Experimental Snapshot 2 and then again in Experimental Snapshot 3. And right off the bat, you can see them doing a bit of work to make those cliffs in the background there, the kind of Shattered Savannah-esque generation, a lot less linear. You don't see as many sheer cliffs, you see a little bit more of the terrain sloping up from the bottom of it. Even if it turns into a sheer cliff, it starts looking a lot more naturalistic and, as the changelog puts it, less like a chunk error. So very happy to see that as a change. There's another set of fairly sheer cliffs behind that, which once again you still get a decent side-by-side comparison of, and those look much the same, but they are smaller cliffs, so it feels a little bit less extreme to look at it that way. And again, the biomes have been evened out a little bit. This is a frozen river leading into a mega taiga biome in Experimental Snapshot 3, where in Experimental Snapshot 2 it was a mixture of different forests, the roofed forest and the taiga, and a variety of other things were kind of thrown in haphazard here and there. Here is one instance in which a pillager outpost was able to generate, because both of these biomes were a taiga, and aside from a couple of tree placements, this area is largely the same in both. You see a mega taiga off there on the right in Experimental Snapshot 2, which isn't there in Snapshot 3, but largely speaking, it tends to be much the same. This is the more mountainous world that we saw right at the end of my video about Snapshot 2, and this was going to be a really interesting test because of how mountainous the terrain is. This entire area is like an enormous range of mountains, so it was going to be interesting to see the differences. There is, off camera unfortunately, but on the opposite side of the mountain on the left, there was a jungle that was grown up there in Experimental Snapshot 2, completely gone in Snapshot 3. So once again, they are trying to work on the temperature of the biomes being consistent and making sure that jungles don't generate at elevations that are going to generate more snowy biomes. Aside from that, you're seeing a little bit of the same terrain generation here. There is a little bit of change in the snowy peaks on the left and the right there. A lot more trees. There's actually a grove biome there, where previously it was a snowy slopes biome in Snapshot 2, and a few of those biomes have been moved around a little bit to account for the snowier and icier biomes really only occurring at higher elevations. That's also reflected in the valley here as we drop down, and Experimental Snapshot 3 gives us a plains biome kind of feel instead of the snowier aspects of it, which can make it slightly less hazardous if you don't have powder snow everywhere and you're trying to navigate this area on foot. And now the last of our worlds that I generated for the Experimental Snapshot 2 video, mostly because this one contained my favorite piece of terrain generation that I've seen in these snapshots so far, an enormous lush cave basin at the end of a frozen river. And as you can see, once again, on the right-hand side, Experimental Snapshot 3 has brought a frozen ocean biome all the way up to these cliffs on the left-hand side. So the stony shore is still there, even has a little bit of snow to it, which is kind of lending itself to the frozen ocean vibe, but then when you hit the river, the frozen ocean disappears entirely, and so does the ice and snow from the biomes on either side. This is just a redistribution of biomes. It's not like those biomes in that generation is completely gone from the game, but it does lend a slightly different vibe to the area, and the frozen river on the left-hand side is completely gone as we get to the lush cave basin over here, which thankfully was still pretty much intact. And I would love to find something like this in the world that eventually becomes Survival Guide Season 2, because I would love to work with a lush cave terrain that opened out to the sky like this. So I'm very happy generation like this still exists and hasn't gone away with the changes they've made in Experimental Snapshot 3, because this is probably, like I said, one of my favorite landscapes I've discovered so far. Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that little side-by-side look at some of these world seeds in the two different experimental snapshots, the most recent ones at least, and I couldn't help but finish up the video by returning to this area in world number 2, where we encountered this beautiful lush cave below a mushroom island. This is not only a lush cave that travels all the way down into deep slate levels, if you look a little further down there, has these fantastic waterfalls all underneath a mushroom island. It is also a lush cave that borders on a frozen ocean, and these enormous walls of packed ice can be found down here inside the cave. Some truly remarkable world generation. If you check out any of the worlds from today's videos, I would encourage you to check out this one and come to the coordinates. This is, once again, at about 1800, 400. Check it out. It's a fantastic location and truly special, I think, in all of the stuff that I've found. The lush cave stretches out into different corners of the underneath of this mushroom island, and the spore blossoms and packed ice, and the entire thing feels really quite magical. But that is where we are going to wrap up this video for today. Once again, the changelog for each of these experimental snapshots has been in the description of each new video. I haven't covered every aspect of the changelog this time. I just kind of touched on the stuff that made sense to recap in this video. But if you are at all interested in seeing more from this snapshot, of course, and future snapshots, don't forget to let me know in the comments, because I love knowing that this is the kind of video you folks are after. I've had a lot of people let me know that they like the fact that I explore these snapshots in survival, but if you want to see more side-by-side comparisons of seeds and potentially go through the entire changelog in future to see what's new, then let me know and I'll be happy to take that feedback on board. For now though, that is going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for checking out Experimental Snapshot 3 with me. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.